Hello, everybody. Thank you for sticking around after the break after a long special episode of Table Takes, where Tanya and Gabe spoke with our regular Table Tape hosts, along with Javion, about Into the Motherlands. So now we're going to have a little bit of a longer conversation. We're joined by B. Dave Walters to go into a little bit more detail about Into the Motherlands, maybe dive into some specifics. So if anybody has any questions in chat, post them in there. Just tag Frequent Beef. And we will get them added to the agenda and try to cover them before we're done with the episode. But why don't we go through and introduce who is joining us today? So first, we have Tanya DePast, who is the creative director of the project, a cast member for one of the shows, the producer, and season 8 for the DM for Rivals of Waterdeep, RPG developer, and a diversity consultant. We also have Gabe Hicks, the developer, game designer, and voice actor. He's been working in both tabletop and digital, but Into the Motherlands has been a chance to flex experience from both and create what you said you want to see in the world. I think is something that you were expressing earlier in Table Takes. And then B. Dave Walters is joining us now as the lead developer, a writer, a storyteller, filmmaker. He plays freely on Silver and Steel, the DM of A Darkened Wish. It's a D&D game. You're directing an upcoming documentary called Dear America from a Black Guy. So again, congratulations on the funding of that project. We're excited to see what you do with it.
Thank you.
So the three of you are representing a pretty fantastic all-star team of creators of color working on a new project called Into the Motherlands. And I know we probably have some people who were here for the conversation earlier, but do the three of you kind of want to give just a quick explanation of an elevator pitch on what Into the Motherlands is?
I like everybody just looks at me. Dave is better at the elevator pitch. I have to talk to that. So Into the Motherlands is a new sci-fi RPG odyssey that is very Afrofuturistic, where we have some folks who made their way not where they were going, but to the planet that is now known as Misalia, and they've integrated into society, and our story picks up about 2,000 years after they arrived.
Awesome. So I think one of the first questions that might occur to a lot of people is why science fiction? And I know that you've talked a little bit about how many fantasy actual plays and streams there are out there, but I was very curious about why you picked science fiction, because it seems like science fiction RPGs have a little bit of a harder time kind of gaining purchase, at least in the community. And I was curious if that was a concern when you went into it, how you feel you might address that when the game comes out.
I talked about it a lot earlier. I don't know if Gabe or B. Dave want to start off.
I have thoughts, but go for it, Gabe.
I think science fiction games often have a hard time being picked up because it usually comes from groups that have already specialized in something else.
Sure.
They have a prime fan base that they built up with another product, and then they delved into this. This has been our core focus from the beginning.
Yeah, as much as I love things like Spelljammer, it was like D&D, but now it's in space, and it's like, what? Take this thing in space does not make it science fiction. I think as much as I have loved science fiction and spent hundreds, thousands of hours in these worlds and in my mind, if I think back to my most formulative experiences in media, they were all science fiction media. Things like Star Wars, Star Trek, even to a lesser extent, even comic books, I think classified more as science fiction as an art form. So I think it was important to us to not only contribute more to the deluge of fantasy, which none of us are knocking because we all very much participate in the fantasy streaming and gaming space, but to be able to tell the specific story that we were trying to tell of a civilization of people of color that was not defined by colonialism or its aftermath. And that was only really possible in a science fiction setting.
Okay. Well, even science fiction itself is a pretty wide genre. Like you even mentioned, a handful of different shows that are all very, very different from each other. So if you were to drill into a little bit in the sci-fi, where would you put Into the Motherlands? Would you put it next to Star Trek? Would you put it next to Star Wars, Babylon 5, Firefly, any of those classics?
For me personally, I think the debate between Star Wars and Star Trek is kind of an illusionary one. Like I love them both
Sure.
equally, but
Yeah.
to me, Star Wars is a dark, scummy universe where evil has won. But good is always on its heels. You're always inches away from final defeat, pushing back. Star Trek is a hopeful exploration and a brighter future. It is a better tomorrow. They have problems, they solve their problems, and then they keep moving because they're all choosing to be there of their own free will and enjoying it. I think tone-wise, and of course it's going to vary from session to session and table to table, but I think the tone of what we're after the game is this is a better world, but you still might be struggling in it. So for my money, I think we're trying to land somewhere around Firefly, Battlestar Galactica-ish, even though, things take an abrupt hard turn in Battlestar Galactica, but a nice place where you still might have a hard time. At least that's my perception of it. My compatriots here might see it differently.
I think.
Go ahead, Gabe.
Well, I was gonna think. I think Dave hit a really good point with Firefly. For me, it's if Black Panther didn't have to be hidden and they were in this place where they could build up exponentially to combine that with Firefly, that's what it's felt like to me.
Okay. Tanya, did you have something you wanted to add too?
Yeah, I just was thinking about Firefly, which I like, except without the consumptive nature of using Asian mythology and Asian imagery and using that without acknowledging it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of things that we can love that have some deep rooted problems that need to at least be acknowledged if you're going to kind of engage with it healthily.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Firefly has its own boat there.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I'd ask, is why sci-fi? And Dave, you mentioned that you felt like the story could only be told in a sci-fi setting. So, are there some advantages or opportunities that you as a team felt that sci-fi provided you that fantasy wouldn't? Do you feel that the audience is going to approach or connect with the game in a different way than if it was just fantasy?
One of the hardest things with fantasy, at least for me, is no matter what you do, someone's going to say Dungeons and Dragons. And this is not that. When you have sci-fi, they don't usually make that connection automatically. But if you say fantasy, you don't say it. And someone doesn't think, well, how would like Dungeons and Dragons is it? And then you have to pull them back from that notion and then move them forward. If you say sci-fi, it's a whole lot more of a clear foundation.
Sure. And it sounds like even if they were to respond to that with like, oh, like Star Trek, then they're still closer to where you kind of want them to be.
Because that's less about mechanics and more about narrative.
Sure.
Yeah. And and with fantasy, I'm going to always be that person on any interview, but it's going to be harder for some people to watch an all Black and brown cast and buy into the fact that it's fantasy. They're going to come up with every reason why this isn't possible, this isn't real, forgetting the fact that we have dragons and elves and all the things that people accept is okay without batting an eye in a fantasy setting. But if you put a bunch of brown people, then it's like, but this can't be real. This isn't, what is it, historically accurate, which there's no history. Someone sat at a table and made all of this up. So that excuse should never be applied to fictional media because we are not recreating or rewriting history per se, but we get to exist, and it doesn't have to be a controversial thing that a bunch of brown folks are exploring space. But if we did it with fantasy, like, well, why aren't you all drow? Why aren't you this? Black people can't do blah, blah, blah. And that's the fight I'm actually just tired of having. I get tired of the conversation. I get tired of well, this doesn't make sense. Well, I suppose a talking dragon and a Scottish dwarf makes perfect sense to you then.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, of course, I agree with all of that. And also, I think to Gabe's point, it is true. D&D is such a monolith in the space that science fiction doesn't have that exact parallel, because if nothing else, Star Wars and Star Trek split it like immediately. So there's more room to define it. But it's several things. I mean, as I've said in many platforms, the thing that put me on the map was being very vocally critical of the portrayal of Chult in Tomb of Annihilation a few years ago when they facelifted it. When it came out in the 80s, of course, it was horrifically racist, pygmies and cannibals, and it was a product of its time. That's neither here nor there. And then the update was no longer horrifically racist. It was just really tone deaf, that the black people were still defined in the vacuum of colonialism. And I was like, look, it's a fantasy game. The black people could be from the moon. Like we could do anything, and you did this. And to WotC's eternal credit, they listened and have actively attempted to do better, and they work with people like me. They work with Tanya. They were, Gabe has participated in conversations about diversity and inclusion that have all been vital. So bravo to them. But it doesn't fix that ingrained thing that Tanya was talking about of the elves are fair and the fair people are the good ones and the orcs are all terrible and dark, that we don't have to have that woven into our story. And I think people underestimate the contributions of black people to science fiction. Cyberpunk was created by a black man. That entire genre was created by a black man. And even little things like I play a lot of Vampire the Masquerade, a lot of World of Darkness. And oftentimes it's easier for people to get into those games because it's this world and it's a world they understand. You don't have to comprehend Waterdeep. It's LA. Science fiction helps, I think, lower that barrier of onboarding of, yes, you're on a different planet, but you comprehend these are human beings, they're in space. You don't have to worry about what's an elf, what's a dwarf, do we live underground? And it lowers the barrier of entry into that. And finally, especially with Wakanda having come to the forefront of pop culture lately, I think that's also a concept people understand. And once again, for all time, shout out to my homies Stan Lee and Jack Kirby for making T'Challa and Wakanda at a time that they didn't have to, when they made T'Challa not just a good man, but the best man, and Wakanda not just a good place, but the best place, pre-civil rights, was a huge jump forward. It was a very progressive thing that I don't know that they get proper credit for, but all of those things have laid the foundation for us to get to do what we do now.
So it kind of sounds like sci-fi was a way to avoid some of the baggage or preconceptions from fantasy, provide something that was maybe a little more accessible to folks who find fantasy hard to identify with, and then also kind of establish a slightly more optimistic tone in the universe kind of right off the bat. Great. Well, so the other kind of like really key fundamental piece of information is your first stream is premiering on Sunday, this Sunday, October 4th at 4 p.m. Pacific, I believe. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. How long is that supposed to run?
Do you mean
the episode? The length.
Oh, every episode will be 3 hours.
Okay, great. And so that's when the stream starts. When does the game as a product that people can play start?
We're going to have, I believe, a quick start guide out probably after we're done with the stream, and then we are talking to publishers about a physical book. So that's all in the ether. So optimistically, I'll say some point 2021.
Okay. So the plans for the actual production release as a product are not finalized yet.
Yes, we're planning on it being a product. Okay. It's just a matter of who's going to publish it and how long that will take, because anyone who's ever made an RPG, who has put out a book, knows that it is not a quick process.
Yep, that is true. Just out of curiosity, did you intentionally decide to go with a publisher as opposed to kickstarting it yourself as a group, or is this a thing that has kind of come up as people have reacted to your initial announcement?
A little column A, little column B. I have done a Kickstarter, and having done a Kickstarter just for enamel pins and knowing the amount of work that goes into it, it's also, we're still in a pandemic, even when people are trying to act like we're not. And books aren't cheap. They're not cheap to make. They're not cheap to ship. And so even if there was a tangible book I could hold up right now, I'm also jaded enough to think that, yes, there's hype for it. That doesn't mean people are going to drop $60 on a book for a brand new system. So who knows? We may still wind up doing some crowdfunding. We may not. But if we can get a publisher to go, here's a book, and you don't have to deal with a Kickstarter, that's going to sell me more on going with any one publisher than anyone else. Because I kind of hate doing Kickstarters, because even if you don't physically make anything yourself, just the anxiety of running a Kickstarter, get everything out the door.
Yeah. I mean, I've done 2 this year, and my call before this literally is planning a 3rd one for some people.
Gosh,
I
Dave.
I am what I am, Gabe. Okay, but
And I think chat was wondering, Dave, if it had been calculated how many things you are involved with,
I
and I
think
think the ultimate decision was all of them.
I literally at this exact second have what can easily be construed as 7 full-time jobs. But I just wanted to say, but to Tanya's point, it's we are fortunate to have a lot of options, which is fantastic. And we're just trying to be vigilant of what's going to be the best outcome for us, and of course ultimately the best outcome for the people, because we want to create something dope, we want to create something beautiful, and something that can have a meaningful impact where, maybe in the times to come when somebody's trying to create a new game, the question then will be like, oh, is it like Into the Motherlands or not? So we have the advantage of options, but we want to make sure we're precise to make the most of the opportunity. That's all.
So then, like, a lot of the other natural questions that, like, I as a gamer who has too large of a collection behind me would then ask of, like, well, what books are you going to publish, what's going to come out, what are the supplements, like, it sounds like all of that is still far in the future, figure out how you want to release it. But then there's the interesting kind of flip side of that question of, if you don't know when the game is exactly going to come out, and you are starting with the stream now, and I think Tanya talked about this in the previous discussion, this gives you kind of a very interesting opportunity to play with the game in public and let people engage with it both as players and as fans, kind of in a different way than usual before you set the thing in stone. So, how do you feel the process of streaming it for the public before the game is quote unquote finished will affect the final result? How much do you feel that things might change?
I think probably a decent bit, but I feel like that's one of the beautiful things this game has the opportunity for, because as we see what people love and people latch on to, or people don't vibe with as much, as we develop and add things, we get a chance of like, okay, this is what people really want to see. We can flesh out this area. But if like this other area never really gets any attention, isn't really of interest, then it allows us to shift our attention on what is the actual focus. And then we don't really have much of a moment of like, I wasted that time because this thing isn't interesting. It's like, this thing is interesting. We know where we need to put the time and effort into.
Yeah, we have the opportunity to have a finished product with very little fat on it. When the parallel we keep using, if you remember in Wallace and Gromit, there's a scene where the train's rolling and Gromit's on the front laying the track down as they're rolling. Like that's been it from the beginning. Because when we first started talking about this, and Tanya and I were talking, and it was, we have to have 12 episodes done by the end of the year. Cool. Need to create the game, no problem at all. And just pulled out the calendar and was like, well, if that's true, we need to be done by here, which means we need to start by here, which means the game needs to be done by here. And what seemed like was an abundance of time was actually no time at all. But it's been beautiful because, like, when we were starting, I think we started doing what a lot of people do when they create a game, where they were like, I want to write 5,000 years of mythology. And I was like, no, y'all, what needs to be on the screen? Episode 1, like what is just enough. And then we can grow out from there. And to Gabe's point, we created a bunch of character classes, put that in front of the cast. They gravitated towards this, that, or the other. Those were the things we fleshed out, and so it has been a great way to grow the game organically in that sense.
I was just about to ask, like, mechanically and setting wise, how has the cast been involved in that kind of creation? Just in terms of like, are you basically just designing what you need for them to continue with their characters? Or, do you have, at least a first draft of pretty much the whole game done and you present it with them and they're interacting with it, almost in like a playtest fashion?
It's a little of both because, we said here are your options. So we've got like our playable cultures or playable origins, our jobs. It's like, here is your buffet. Pick what you like. And then, even though you're reading this now, if there's something you want to change or add to it, And we can also see real time how someone plays out, like a combat medic versus someone who may be more of like a healer or something like that, and see where it needs tweaks, where it needs balances, but also factoring in how this person is bringing their personality and the story they want to build. So it's a little both. So we didn't just go, here's a book, you're stuck with whatever you want. It's like, pick what you like, and then we can tailor it for the stream. And then what you're doing can also become canon.
We could literally change abilities if someone comes up with a clever idea we never thought of that just fits. It's like, yeah, you know what? Let me figure out how it works. Let me figure out how that would work for like the other type of, or like they're like with the person running it, if they come up with like an interesting concept and then it fits into one of the character types that we already have, it's so easy to put that in there, and then it's a part of the world, and it was just creativity.
Yeah, we explained it to the cast, like, yes, here's your buffet, but also we can make literally anything you want in the back. You know, like if you've been waiting to play an anthropomorphic giraffe that smokes too much and, you know, craves the taste of flesh, we'll figure out a way to make that work. You know, we've had the opportunity to, again, build it all real time. And Eugenio, who's running the game, has been a part of the writing team also. And that's very much been the message that, like, look, man, as you're going through this, if it turns out we needed rules for you know, pirate battles up on a tightrope, we'll make them, you know, no problem. Where that's not true in a lot of other things that are more or less, you know, fixed when you show up.
So, Dave, are you telling me that you don't think every RPG should just by default have rules for battles up on a tightrope?
I mean, I didn't want to. I don't want to just out people, you know, because I work with different brands. But I mean, if you don't have pirate tightrope combat rules, maybe something's wrong with your system. I'm just saying.
What are you even doing?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I wanted to get into the setting a little bit, and I think you've alluded to some of this as we kind of talked through it. But beyond sci-fi, what can you share about the details of the setting, basically? You know, like maybe getting beyond the elevator pitch, you know, talking a little bit more about like, what does the world look like? What does it feel like? You know, how are players going to connect with it? And it seems like there's also, you know, at least I had some misconception about some of the ideas around the initial announcement of the diaspora experience. I think I had misheard that it was a group who had kind of gone out and was returning to where they may have come from at some point, but it doesn't sound like that's the case at all. It's humans who are arriving in a region that's, you know, already populated by a variety of other species and whatnot, and they're learning how to interact and integrate with that.
Well, Dave and I were brainstorming, and that's when we also had that moment of, oh, we should be filming very soon. But like when we discovered when we're in sync, it's kind of scary. And he's like, and I was like, here's my idea. My idea was initially a little grimdark. I freely admit this now that we're not doing this idea. But at first I was grimdark. Well, you know, because we'd also been talking about like we wanted to have a story where brown and black people were not based on tragedy. But I was initially thinking, you know, we said deuces to COVID and we just left the planet and found this other place. Because that was my initial thought of like, well, we left. Y'all didn't do anything about COVID. We're out. But then Dave was like, hold on. What about this idea? Because I also admit I'm the worst history student ever. I barely passed it in high school and college. He's like, what about Mansa Musa? And I was like, well, what about him? And so while Dave is telling me about this, I'm like Googling because I don't want to admit I don't know who this is while we're chatting. And he was like, the richest man in the world. I think he's still like the richest man in history. But also he sent a convoy or a fleet out toward the Americas that never made it. And it's like, what if they wound up on this planet? We'll hand wave how they got there later. But they're there, and now it's 2,000 years later, and we'll figure out what they were doing in those 2,000 years.
So it's been 2,000 years since humans have arrived in this region.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a few centuries ahead of now. Yeah. So about another 400 to 600-ish years from now. Yeah.
Okay. And then does that also mean that the fleet that arrived there was not already like a hyper advanced technological fleet? At least, you know, compared to what we would have figured now is.
Yeah, no, they would have been 14th century appropriate humans that have now been in that environment essentially for 2,000 years with their own trajectory of technological advancement in their environment and neighboring species.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you have a bunch of aliens that usually involves technology, there's likely a great deal of cross-pollination going on there. But in a lot of ways, it almost sounds like this game is not, quote unquote, pure sci-fi. It's not like spaceships flying through the galaxy, exploring one planet after another. Or maybe it is, but like that's not the starting point, I guess, for the where this is different from real world history or whatever.
I think it's the difference between the starting point of the story versus the starting point of the game.
Got it.
Because the story, like, even one of my favorite things was developing how they ended up living where they were, which is why we talked about, like, there was no colonization, there was community and bonding with the people that were there. So as they were saying, like, talking about what happens in that 2,000 years, this game is happening in the 2,000 years after, and then we're just giving the lore of what happened in that. But that's more, as like Dave was saying, that's more of the meat of the story that you have to work with. But it's not, the game begins at this futuristic point where travel and stuff like that is plausible. It's just, it's showing the difference in technological advancement if we hadn't gone through like the aspects of slavery and like persecution and dentists, like all that stuff. We didn't have those negative repercussions. So how far did we come without those things that held us back?
So that also presumes that this fleet, now with a different identity, because they've been living there for 2,000 years, they have not discovered how to get back to where they came from, correct? They haven't gotten back to Earth or whatever?
They didn't want to go back, pimpin'.
They're like, oh, wait. Just because here's the thing. It's because I figure, like, back then, they're like, okay, we're here. And by the time they have space travel, they could have looked at Earth and been like, you know what? I'm good. We're good right here. Just because you can't go back to a place doesn't mean you want to.
Yeah, I will say the ultimate fate of Earth will be revealed in due time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key question I have is, do they even know that it's there to have a thought about whether they should go back to it or not? But it sounds like that's a thing that you want to reveal as it goes along.
I'd say they probably know it's there, but if 2,000 years pass, if they get to a point of space travel and they found a place that they're happy to, and this planet has everything they need, this planet is safe, this planet is their home, it's no longer, Earth is no longer their home. This is their home now. It'd be going to a whole foreign planet, and why would they go to a foreign planet if they have a safe place already?
Sure. So I mean, I think some of go ahead.
I would just add to what Gabe is saying. It's like, we don't hearken back to the times of the Roman colonization. Like, that's not a place that we wish to visit. It's similar with them.
But we do have people who obsess and like to fantasize about that place. Are there folks, in this setting who romanticize Earth? Maybe they don't want to live there, I guess, like, that's just a question I have. It sounds like, individual tables might be able to explore that, or that you haven't identified or you haven't confirmed how you want to confront that yet, because it sounds like you want the fate of Earth to be a little secretive yet.
I don't feel like Earth really pertains is like the biggest thing. Because the Earth is not the Motherlands. It's the Motherlands is this planet they are. There might be a character who has that concept, but it's like the idea of if the people who are born in California and then move to Minnesota and never think about California again.
Sure.
They exist, and it's or if you take a fantasy game, very rarely I feel like you have people who ever go back to where they were from or want to go back to where they were from. And in a world where there are potentially dozens and thousands of planets, Earth is probably the least interesting.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So, we talked about Firefly a little bit. Firefly has travel within the system. How does interplanetary or even interstellar travel like work into the Motherlands? How common is it? Would a group of players be expected to kind of have their own ship and travel from planet to planet and do like a planet of the week kind of Star Trek kind of thing, or how does that work out?
No, without giving too much away, because we want people to tune in on Sunday.
Sure.
People do have ships. It's not like they're like pre-Earth and like just now discovered you can get to the moon. They can travel. They can go around between planets. But if the focus is looking at the planet that they have now integrated into, yes, there'll be chances to leave that planet and go see what's nearby, but it's not like we're going to go break the Prime Directive this week on the Motherlands. It's not that kind of thing, because we spent all this time building this world. We want to show you that world, and there will be some leaving the planet eventually, but we also went hard on creating characters and these cultures, so we want to get people to know that first. Because
Sure.
I mean, let's be real, if I could leave Earth today and go somewhere else real cool, I'm out.
I think that's also a problem that you run into in a lot of science fiction, is the hero's journeying to a new place. The concept is basically the same. If you leave Waterdeep and you go to Baldur's Gate, within the context of the narrative, you've gone from city to city. But what ends up happening, even in things like Star Wars or Star Trek, where, to join the Federation, you have to have a singular government, there, with extremely rare exception, there is no difference between going to this city on Vulcan and that city on Vulcan. You're still just going to the different place. So we're trying to make not whole planets into tropes, or whole moons into tropes.
So no water world, no desert world.
I mean, hey, just spoilers. But yeah, but there will be lots of toys in that toy box to explore. But to Tanya's point, the home world has plenty of interesting things to do. And if you go to another planet, it will also have lots of things to do there, not just the one.
Well, so to talk a little bit more about that central mother world, then maybe. I think another key question that comes up a lot of times when you talk about sci-fi is, well, what about aliens? Tanya had some interesting points about the term alien relative to, these humans arriving where a bunch of people already are. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before we get into some of the individual species that you've talked about so far?
Tanya, we even talked today, the humans arriving. It might not be a thing that's in everyone's game. Because you have humans that are technically already here. It might be that however far this place is, it's so far out of the reach that there was never any communication. The humans that arrive might not even be from Earth, because there's expansive universes. And it's leaving it as more of an optional thing that people could include in their stories instead of having to say it is. I feel like giving them that narrative power allows them to build the Motherlands. The stories are going to be different because there will be different people there. If the humans never arrived, maybe that's the ideal that they wanted. It's these people have their home, and there's like we talked about the Earth thing, there's never any interaction with Earth again.
Yeah, and when talking about aliens, the humans that are kind of the conceit of how they got there, they're the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
The cultures and folks that are indigenous to this planet, because they have, it's it makes me think of it, and without comparing it too much, it's like when the Vulcans meet humans in First Contact, where, okay, cool, you landed on this planet and you decide to stay and you've not integrated, but they were always the humans that we are bringing forward 2,000 years are the aliens. And, as we go, there could be cultures and origins that are either created through interactions or things that we talk about kind of post episode. But alien in this sense is the humans are the aliens. And I find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk about some of those species that were already there, or maybe were also visitors themselves. But let's talk about some of the non-human species that players might be able to play or that they might interact with. I think you have shared some details on at least 3 different ones so far. Mm-hmm. There are some native cephalopods. There are, I believe you said, hyper-intelligent anthropomorphic hyenas. Mm-hmm. And I think Gabe, you were very excited about sounds like a human plant hybrid.
Yeah, so it's interesting. it's a weird thing because it's almost like there aren't technically humans on this place anymore, because as time passed, as they were on this planet, they changed. The Salanti, which are the plant type, were originally humans that came here, and because this world is not like our own, it's different. As people adapt and evolve and their environment changes them, whether it's what they eat or what like they're exposed to, they become something different.
Dave, do you want to talk about cephalopods and I'll talk about the other ones?
Yeah, the hapalog, my sweet babies. You know, I think we envisioned all of these people. Let me be clear on something. When we're saying there's going to be no colonialism, it doesn't mean there will be no conflict. It also doesn't necessarily mean there won't be resources-based conflict. That's still very real. When we're talking about no colonialism, we mean one group didn't take over a group and then try and overwrite who and what that group is. You know, they're still distinctly themselves. And as such, we created a lot of the alien races, and there will be more, as more from perceptive differences. Like I'm a big nerd, so I like to read things about like the neurology and cognition of like birds and dolphins and octopi and things, in like the work that goes in to try and communicate with those species, because the way they process information is so different. It's actually used in many instances as a test case for how we will communicate with intelligent life should we ever meet it openly. And when we started thinking about a villainous species, I love the Daleks. The Daleks are supreme. So having a cephalopodic, ocean-based amphibious enemy that is your enemy just because they just see things so vastly different than you was fascinating to me. And the idea of a 12-foot octopus sliding down a cave towards you while you're trying to shoot at it futilely is just sells itself. So that's the race I'm most excited about, but I'm excited about all of them. And, we wanted to take the tropes and turn them on their heads. Like, you think of a hyena, you don't think ultra intelligence. And it's like, yeah, but why though? Why? It's not because it's like a brown four-legged mammal, because, cheetahs and lions are. Why do you have that preconceived notion? And all through this development, we tried to make sure that we hit certain notes that people expect, but flipping as many tropes as we could if possible, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah, because with the hyenas, and the funny thing is, like, the humans that we have dumped on this planet 2,000 years ago see them and think hyena, and they're looking at you like, what's a hyena? I'm sorry, who? What? And so,
why is it speaking to me?
Right, like, first off, it's on two legs. Second of all, it's talking. 3, it's wearing clothes. And also, did we like bump our heads in the crash? How did we get here? Am I hallucinating? Did we take the good herbs on this trip? And for me, I wanted to turn the idea of like, and I know that Dave and Gabe will probably groan, but the D&D comparison of orcs and how orcs are savage and they're stupid and they're warlike. And I'm like, well, it's not fantasy. We're not going to have a equivalent of an orc, but what about a great cat that is not a lion? Because people think lions are noble and pretty and whatever. What about hyenas? Now, granted, I don't want to hang out with a hyena IRL because it would probably eat me in like 3 seconds or chase me or whatever. But imagine really super smart hyena type people that are the backbone of scholarly life on a planet. I can't think of anyone that's done that. Maybe they have, and I just never read it, but that appealed to me of again, flipping the tropes on their head and doing something entirely different.
And dare I say, it speaks to the whole point behind this, that the ones you thought were savage were technically, silently, subtly the best. You just didn't notice.
Yep. Are there any other alien cultures, communities, factions, species that get you really excited? You want to share with people, or you want to keep them all secret?
Tune in on Sunday.
Okay.
All right. I mean, unless one of you want to say, "Don't let me interfere there."
No. We gotta get people in. We gotta get y'all into to watch.
And players will be able to play many of these alien species, right?
Except for the hapalok. The hapalok are not playable.
They're just too alien for players to understand, basically.
No, we just decided they're not playable.
Yeah.
Maybe later. Got to save something for the sequel.
That's
Sure,
true.
sure. That goes into the whole how many books are you publishing them kind of conversation, it sounds like.
No, and and actually I wanna touch on that because I never want to create something where someone looks at that and goes, oh, that's a little too weird for me, or I don't want to do that because I'm sure we have all played that one game where you lay it out on the table and 4 hours later you're still reading the instructions on how to play this game. And that's not what I ever want to create with the RPG or any other game, be it table, be it like a board game version, what have you. And I don't want to insult players by ever saying that because I'm not going to make something so complicated. Because if I can't do it as the creator, I'm not going to do that to somebody else.
Sure. Sure. I mean, like I admit there's a primal joy in me in reading a lot of RPG material that probably is not actually of any use at the table. White Wolf has trained me well on that, but still, it's nice to have a game that's really focused on, I guess, respecting the player's time to get something on the table and get it going and make it accessible. So why don't we kind of step into the system a little bit? Just in case people don't know, you are using the Cortex Plus system. That's not out yet. It's not fully released. It went out to backers and whatnot. So I was curious how you settled on that. Like, how did you decide that's definitely the one we want to use?
Cortex Prime.
Oh, Prime. I'm sorry.
But well, same thing in that exact same conversation where Tanya had when we sort of marked everything down on the calendar. We realized that we had about a month to get the game to a playable state. And it was, did we try and create something from scratch? That pretty quickly went out the window. And then it became about, well, if we try and license an existing OGL, what do we want? And it so happens, I have a good relationship with D&D Beyond. I'd been down to their headquarters in February on the last trip pre-quarantine that I didn't know was my last trip pre-quarantine. And at the time, Adam showed me a lot of the Cortex stuff and what they had, some of which has been announced and some of it hasn't. So I'm not going to say anything, but they were very excited about the modular nature of the system. And I knew they were very excited about getting that launched. And so reached out to Adam Bradford, said, hey, look, if you let us use this, we can be one of your flagship shows to show what can be done with the system. And he very quickly agreed, brought in Cam Banks, the lead developer. They've been absolutely fantastic the whole time and helping us with the development every step of the way. And I don't think we could have gotten to as robust as a playable game as we have in this time without their help. And the plan is Hunter's Entertainment with the Outbreak Undead system that I've played a lot of and run a lot of has basically 3 different modes of playing the game because it's a pretty crunchy system where they call it arcade mode, weekend warrior, and survivalist. We have our own conception of essentially 3 tiers of complexity of here's the basic game, just how to enjoy it. Here's a few more mechanics, and here's even more to round it out. And you're going to see that over the course of the show, that even as they start with the adventure, it will be fairly simplistic. A few episodes in, when people kind of got their sea legs, it's like, well, okay, now here's another level of complexity of things you can do. And then a little further on, here's another level, and expand it out that way. Because we want it to make the barrier of entry as low as possible to players, and yet as rich and complex an experience as the individual want it to be.
Gabe, Tanya, anything you want to add or?
No, I mean, Dave has really been the saving our bacon in that sense because we just sat down and went, if we have to build out a whole new system, this may not work out because building mechanics, I mean, for me, it's a weak spot in development, but also it just takes a while because you got to figure out balance and literally what do I roll to do a thing. And I didn't want to wind up with basically doing a D20 system because again, that would lend to it's D&D, but in space. No, I didn't want to do that.
Cortex is a lot of open narrative, and in a circumstance where we're building from the ground up, that's probably one of the best things that we could have.
Mm-hmm. Well, chat's also asked another question, or the next thing I was going to ask is, how much have you changed the system from the basic Cortex tools that are provided? Is someone who is already familiar with Cortex, maybe back to Kickstarter, has played some games, can they hop right into Into the Motherlands?
Yeah, the core mechanics are all unchanged. So the essence of what makes the game should be very familiar to Cortex players. What we did is we've somewhat altered the application of some things. Like, for instance, this game will not have an attribute system that you might be accustomed to. There is no strength, dex, con, wisdom. The game is built primarily upon skills and values. What do you as an individual know, and what do you as an individual care about? There's some other things that affect your dice pools, but that's going to be the essence of it. And we did that on purpose because, again, all of us work actively to refute this idea that, you know, your race defines you, that has been a baseline concept of so many different games up until now. And as I've said before, any intrinsic correlation between race and morality is intrinsically problematic, because you might notice at no point did I say the Hapalock are evil, even though they're the primary antagonists. We wanted to have that woven into all the way down to character creation, because it will alter the experience at the table when you're like, the fact that I'm trying to shoot this guy before he can hurt someone else, mattering mechanically, is different than any other game I've played, versus just being like, it's pew pew time, roll a d20 or roll d10s or whatever.
So when you say your character is built around values and skills, I think most experienced RPG players kind of get what skills are likely to include. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you mean by values? Like, do you have some examples, from characters that you've made that maybe you want to talk about, or how do you get people up to speed on that?
Either Tanya or Gabe, if you have the list handy, you can feel free to jump in on that. If not, I will ramble, but I'll give you a shot to do it.
Go ahead and ramble, and go ahead, Tanya.
Ramble. I'm grabbing a document. There we go. Because dark mode has defeated me. So, and this is kind of straight out of the book. Like, we look at things like aggression, like, are you super aggressive? Are you brave? What's your determination? Do you have a sense of duty? Are you about the glory? Are you kind of heroic? So things where it would be more of a, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. I mean, but the best word is value. Like, what is your value as a person when you are playing your character? So, the character I'm building out is kind of antithetical to the culture that I picked, and they have those values, but that doesn't mean that all can't be in one character. So it's not like race, where I pick, like in D&D, I'm a human, I picked a paladin, I'm not locked into a certain morality anymore, a certain alignment, but there's an expectation of, as a human paladin, you can only do X, Y, and Z. So if someone, let's say if Hapalock were playable, or Hyenas, our storyteller, decides, okay, as a Hapalock, maybe they're the Hapalock that just like, look, I just want some clean water to live in. Y'all are messing up my water. I'm not really evil, but y'all see me as evil. And it's got a value of duty because it feels a duty to the other Hapalock. That's a way in which, like, that all kind of falls into it. And if I'm not correct on that, Gabe or B-Dave, please let me know. But that's the way I'm viewing values.
So, like, is it a thing that players it sounds like they can kind of define themselves just around the character? There might be a list of recommendations or ideas, but it's very much like, you're bringing your own way you want to phrase it and apply it. And then you talk with the table and the GM to make sure you understand how that's going to actually affect the table.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome.
Everyone has their own motivations of why they do stuff. Their character could be like, this is what I told you I'm doing. And maybe they're deceitful. And they've got their own agenda that they're only telling the storyteller. We don't know.
And how that will manifest also comes up like moment to moment. Like, we do have a specific list of values that will be unveiled on Sunday. But let's say if truth were one of them, you might have a character who is a liar, who still has very high ratings in truth, because the truth is important to them, even if it's in its obfuscation, if that makes sense. Because we don't have an alignment system as such. It all still comes down to the individual, because a good person, I mean, first of all, every villain thinks they're the hero. Like most bad people don't think they're bad people. They think they're good people. They're just doing bad things. And a person who is a good person can still do questionable things at times. And that still also needs to be able to be played out at the table. So
Great. Well, I think that should give I think some idea of what to expect for people who are familiar with Cortex Prime. So then I think the kind of next logical question, once we've kind of talked about the setting a little bit, we've talked about the system a little bit, can we dig a little bit deeper into what players as individuals or as groups are expected to do? Did you build like an adventuring party concept in there? Is there a default campaign or expectation of kind of what the players will be motivated to go do in the gaming world, or is it very much up to the individual table?
Well, for the stream, we do have an adventure being written with the stream in mind. I haven't seen much of it because I am part of the cast, so as not to spoil myself. We do have the basic conceit of it. But the idea is just like any other RPG, you have a reason to eventually be together. And it's not going to be that we meet in the cantina instead of the pub or the inn, but we all have reasons, to go on this eventual adventure. And, there's conflict like we've talked about, but it's not conflict based in race or colonialism. It's thing is happening. Are we going to go fix the thing? I don't know. Maybe we don't fix the thing. Maybe we're like, we got a ship, we're out. Bye. I don't know. That's more of a Eugenio kind of question. Gabe, you have other thoughts, or if you've seen the streamed adventure?
I've seen a little bit of it. And I think that since the game is built for narrative experiences, we have adventures made so that people, if they don't have ideas for their narrative experiences, they can follow. But it's also part of why, like, one of my jobs is making the world a world. I spent literally days just reading on African biomes to figure out how I could emphasize that in this game, with names and cities and environments and what they might feel like. So if someone has an idea of a place they want to explore and delve into because they're running the game, then they have templates or places that they can use and build up on and delve into those stories. And I think with the value system, that even makes it even more interesting, because when you have a character that already has values, you can build adventures off of the values they have. If this person wants glory and this person wants power, those two things together, that's an idea for a campaign right there. And then just how do you want to portray it and how do you want to project it?
Great. Anything else you wanted to add, Dave?
We're working on some concept of team mechanics, but I can tell you, like, during ship combat, there's going to be opportunity. Everyone's going to be able to do something during every single round of combat, because a lot of times it just goes to the pilot, or if you have a pilot and a gunner. But we're going to have opportunities for everyone to contribute. And one of those, as I was talking about, is the game increases in complexity. Things that all of you can do together will enter into the narrative. Yeah.
Great. So I think another very unique aspect of this is Twitch's involvement in everything, where Twitch is financing the production of the stream, correct?
Yes.
Okay, but they're not involved in like the future production you might have for the game itself. They're just focused on the stream.
Correct. And the IP is mine. I have full creative control. There was no, certain person has to be involved. It wasn't like, we're going to stick this super popular streamer in there to make sure there's eyes. And it's like, nope, I had total control over picking the team, over picking all of that.
And did Twitch come to you and basically say, hey, we want to work with you? Just pitch us an idea. We're happy to support it. Or was this part of an initiative they were doing, or how did that connection happen?
Well, there were discussions happening, without breaking my NDA. There were discussions happening, and I made a pitch. They made a counter offer of tell your own story, and I was like, okay, what are the terms? What is the budget? And then I went back to people I'd already been talking to about some content, and said, okay, here's the shift in the story to tell. Tell me what you think. Are you interested? Because not everyone wants to do sci-fi. Maybe some people are firmly in I'm fantasy. That's it. That's all I want to do. And so after some back and forth and signing on the dotted line, making hard choices of who was on the final roster and what is it they were doing. So there are people that kind of do everything, like Gabe streams and develops and does everything else. So it's like, is Gabe on the stream? Is he writing? Is he doing both? And, that bronze girl, Jasmine Buller, who's writing our streamed adventure, her availability didn't work out for being on the stream, but it worked out for being a writer. So just looking at everyone's talents, abilities, etc.
Yeah, you've definitely pulled together a pretty stellar team for this. So I can't wait to see what everybody gets to contribute and pull together.
Yeah, and one of the final character arts was done and shown to me before we hopped in. And so I'm super, super excited for everyone to see our character art, for everyone to meet the cast. And I get to work with people that I really like because it was my choice. And, it was one of those things where I'm in the driver's seat for the first time of anything I've got to do creatively. But it's also, you can't just be like, I like my friends and they're going to come work with me, because as we all know, you can't always work with your friends. So, you have to think about what's best for the project and putting out a good product. And I'm very glad that everyone that's on board, we're all still friends in this process and we all work together, because I have been on projects where by the end of it, we're not friends anymore. So it has been, knock on wood, a fantastic process. And in the time we're living in, I've actually been able to be creative. Like, being around good people motivates me.
Well, I mean, I guess that I'm curious. So you've assembled an awesome team. You're getting a lot of support from Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Has Twitch been involved directly since kind of funding it or giving you the initial idea? Have they given you feedback, or have they connected you with anybody that you maybe didn't already have a connection to, or are there any opportunities that they're presenting kind of through the process beyond kind of starting it?
No, there was no like mandate of anyone who had to be involved.
Sure.
There were, if you don't know this person, we can connect you if you'd like them to be involved. And I was like, well, then you need to give me a lot more money if this is someone you want involved. But they're being supportive. We're talking about marketing. We do have front page while we are doing the show.
Awesome.
So hopefully that'll bring some new eyes. And just the cast alone, between the 5 of us, we've all got great communities. And getting a chance to have us all in one spot, especially since I don't get to talk to a lot of people in the course of a day. So there's 3 guaranteed hours I get to talk to some of my favorite people on a Sunday, which is, for some of us, that's the best and only way to talk to people, is to run a game, and you will see them at least for a couple hours.
Guaranteed socialization.
Yeah, and we get to hang out. We get to just build a world together, and we get to be brown and black and happy on screen, which most of us don't get to do. There's 3 hours where we're going to be in those chairs and tell a story that we want to tell, and not have it be dictated by tragedy or angst or be a 12 years a slave, but in space. I saw Dave's look.
It's true. I mean, and hey, it's not that those stories don't need telling, because they do, because we keep getting told every day those things didn't happen, and they did. That's just not what we're trying to do right now. Also, please holler at me with that fan art in chat so people can see my reaction when send it to me on Facebook so people can see my reaction to the fan art.
Well, this is the fan art. This is the official art of one of our players. I will send it to you while we're chatting.
Yeah, so we can get to see his reaction.
Yes.
So we have a couple questions from chat. I think we've covered a few of them, but why don't we hit on a few of them before we go into some of the more nitty gritty questions that I had prepared. So Magpie asked, what was the one piece of lore that you've created that you've been proudest of? And I think that probably, it sounds like we can kind of ask that of each of you, because everybody's been involved in this in some level, it sounds like. You want to go first, Gabe?
Sure. I think it relates to the origin, because when we were after we talked about how they had gotten there, and we had made clearly we didn't want colonization. I had talked to Tanya and Dave. The culture that's there, the hyena like people that are already there. I feel like when they met them, at least understanding that these people need a home, and then working to there's Dave. That's worth it. Working with the people that came to this world and then giving them these places to live, and then finding these places that were ideal environments for them, which then led to how we have the different evolutions that came to be, which is how the Solansi would come to be because of the region that they were shown to, how the others had evolved and changed. And I love that because colonization is a common thing that happens in games, and it was something that felt like it was an easy fix that then even gave narrative purpose to how this story worked.
Tanya?
Probably one of our professions, because we had a lot of fun with one of the names of one of them, and getting to write it out and look at something where it's kind of like a job or a class that I've had in other games, but also, again, getting to define what it is this character does, because, and also getting away from magic, because it's sci-fi, and a lot of us have the conversation about if magic is a thing that exists, I don't want to have the magic is basically science no one understands. If magic is there, and it's going to be supernatural. But one of the professions is very much psionic. It's very techy, but it also touches on nature. So it's not like, ooh, magic in science we just don't understand. And then when I saw what Gabe did with the hyena, I was like, yes, give me more of this lore, please.
Honestly, Tanya, I thought when you said of one that you made, I thought you were going to say the Spine Ripper, and then you were like jobs that I've had in other games, and I'm like, what?
I mean, she's ripped spines in other games, though. That's the thing.
I believed it.
I mean, I have played Mortal Kombat, so
That's true. You're right.
Yeah, for me, it's only all of it, man. And the idea that we were able to root it in actual history, because Mansa Musa was a real person. The expedition and its ultimate fate, that is a matter of conjecture. People debate it actively. That might have been the origin of the Olmecs, who very clearly were African presenting people in South America, but who knows? But that this man was real, this place was real, this time was real. Even having people look back and maybe learn something from that, I enjoy, and being able to just root it in something tangible so that the world should feel more tangible. Also, I just saw my first piece of official character art, and it did just swell my whole heart 10 times on the screen. It's just we've all truly gotten to leave our own unique marks on this, and the cast is going to leave their own unique marks on it. And the as I've described it to a few people now, it's a baby is fully formed at about the 8-month mark, and the last 2 months are just packing on pounds. That's where this game is now. The core of it exists. Now it's just getting healthier before it emerges out into the world.
Well, it sounds like when it does emerge, it's going to have a whole village of your crew kind of putting it together and raising it too. So another question that came from chat was, what level of the technology is the world at? Like, what is that going to feel like? Do we have, cyber limbs and laser guns and teleporters and stuff like that? And also, like, that also leads to the other question of just how important is gear and technology and equipment going to be to the characters and playing the game?
I mean, they have space travel. We talked about teleportation tech and kind of, is it a thing that everyone has access to, or is it restricted? Is it a have not thing? Like, you got to be so rich to teleport on this thing. And Gabe and I were having a good conversation about it, but it's like original Star Trek. People have technology, and it's not like super secret stuff. Like the aliens they eventually encounter will have different technology, but they all have technology.
That's pretty much it.
Like,
That's
David, I
Tanya
think you're
nailed it.
muted.
Yeah. Oh no, but Gabe was talking. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say Tanya basically nailed what I would have said.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Gabe.
interplanetary travel exists, but it takes effort. We do at least want some capacity for teleportation, but the real challenge with teleportation is in a game about discovery, being able to go places instantly greatly complicates that. So teleportation is not freely available. But I think in that respect, a lot of the things that you do expect to see in science fiction, cybernetics, sentient AIs, interplanetary travel, all of those things are very much present. I don't want to do too much of the, some old civilization was here, the forgotten progenitors, and on occasion we discover a laser sword in the rubble. I'm like, nah, Numenera's knocked that out for everybody. So yeah, this is real technological advancement, from the year 3000 or whatever. Not necessarily exactly the year 3000. Do not take that as gospel.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll clip that for you to show to you later when you've confirmed it. So why don't we probably need to wrap up. I know that all three of you sound like you're real busy right now prepping for all this kind of stuff. So as we kind of wrap up, chat, this is your last chance to ask any questions. If you have a specific thing that you'd like to hear an answer on, let us know. But while chat is kind of considering that, do the three of you maybe want to share what were some of your biggest inspirations as you kind of started doing the work on this project? Like when you sat down to write the lore or do the mechanics or whatever, was there another game, a movie, a book, some music, a piece of history that most or significantly inspired you? And we talked about Mansa Musa, but what other elements kind of did each of you kind of bring into this?
For me, because I feel like what I was gonna say is what Dave would say. So for me, a lot of it is N.K. Jemisin's work, and with the caveat that I am working on an RPG based on the Broken Earth series, but her storytelling and world building is second to none. But she also does the thing that we're doing of brown and black people exist and we're not an afterthought. We naturally belong in the world and we're not like there's a prop. We are part and parcel of the world and its environments, and we're whole people. So, and I'm Nora's friend. So someone who I am a friend of and admire and love her work, it's always like been an inspiration. And granted, the fifth season is very heavy reading. So just a warning, if you start reading it, it does start with a lot of death and destruction in the world literally ending.
It's also real good.
Oh no, well, yes, it's good. It's won 3 Hugo Awards. But I'm just saying, for those that may need that warning, it is very heavy to start. Because when I started reading it, I had to text her and go, "What were you thinking when you were writing this book?" So yeah, I mean, it's an excellent book. Clearly, the trilogy broke a Hugo Award record, but yeah.
Gabe?
I don't know if it was, I don't even think it was a creative work. It was realizing that this is getting the chance to show like that's why I love world building. And I talked about the different biomes in Africa, but Africa is huge and there is so much variety in how it looks, even if you just go an hour. And I loved being able to take that and then create it on a planet-wide scale, because I could sit and read about one area for literally hours about ways different creatures and animals interact there, different plant life, literally having deserts with rivers running through them for miles and miles. And then realizing like, if this was on a planetary scale, this would be a huge, exciting thing. And then as I sat and read about biomes and just biology of it, it's freaking amazing. So that, I think that's been the biggest inspiration for me.
I think for me, Tanya is absolutely right. I was probably going to say Wakanda, which is true. Because it doesn't bother me that Wakanda has become very quickly emblematic of Black excellence. I think if anything, there's just so few opportunities to show Black excellence. And we have a chance to do that now, to have a civilization that is fully formed and fleshed out and functioning, not to become too alliterative. And again, it doesn't mean that they live in this paradise that doesn't have, zero corruption, zero crime. It's not utopian, but it is significant in its own right and stands on its own two legs without having to be defined by something else. And, you know, just like earlier, this it's funny because I know you meant it, you know, genuinely, but when you were like, but what about Earth? And we're all like,
Sure.
forget Earth, you know. I almost used our one F there, but I didn't do it, you know. Because it's like, you know, that's not what we're here to talk about, man. We're here to talk about something completely new and different and beautiful and objectively valid. And we, all of us here at this table, they're making me miss my dreads. I did have them at one point. have I know, let your soul glow, Gabe. You're doing it for both of us, you know. Tanya's are looking especially fresh right now, but we always have to struggle to define ourselves relative to something else, you know, being the Black geek, you know, being the female gamer, being the just whatever. And now is an opportunity to be able to have us define the vocabulary, and we define the conversation, and we define the setting in the game. And I think it is going to produce something that will be a unique experience, both for viewers and the people when they get to play the game themselves.
Well, I think that's what we're all so excited about, is, you know, like as just, you know, fans in general, when the announcement came out, you know, the first thought I had was awesome. Like, you know, I can't wait to see what this team that they put together does when they're kind of just released to do whatever it is that they want to do and just represent what they're excited about. Because kind of to like what Gabe was saying, you can read forever and just discover these things as you're researching any topic. When you have a group that gets really excited about something and goes off and does that, you're gonna find some amazing stuff in that game. So I'm certainly gonna be tuning in on Sunday at 4 p.m. to see kind of where you go. I want to thank all three of you for joining us on that. I can't wait to see where the team that you put together takes this. I can't wait to see the community that grows around it. And I wish you the best of luck in figuring out how and with who you want to publish and release that in 2021. Thank you to everybody who watched, who stuck around from Table Takes. We gave you a whole lot of time with some of the creators here. I hope that all of you found stuff that made you even more excited about the project. Make sure to watch it on Sunday on Tanya's Twitch channel, which is kind of behind everyone, one of them, yep, twitch.tv/Cypher of Tier. So make sure to go follow that so you get notifications when it goes live on Sunday. We have plenty of other stuff on the Gen Con channel. Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific, we have Board Games with the Brothers Murph. Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific, we have This Game Gets Dicey. Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, we have Fireside with Peter Atkinson. He's currently interviewing new voices in D&D, going through the DMs Guild and finding stuff that's been created by, you know, historically marginalized creators, and just talking about them, about where they want to take D&D in the future. It's really, really interesting. Fridays at 2 p.m. Pacific, we have Table Takes, which you probably, hopefully, just watched. Remember to follow our channel, turn on notifications. The opportunity to talk with you about this is great. I'm very excited. I can't wait to see what you do, and I can't wait for the chance to play it with my friends and see where we want to take it. So thank you again. Good luck, and we'll be watching.